Hello and welcome back to another video on the prophets. This time we'll be talking about Amos. Um, Amos was active during a time of great economic success. There was a lot of trade with a lot of foreign nations, but it was also a time of social decay. There was a lot of injustice on display, especially in between the rich and powerful and the poor and not so powerful. There was also a lot of religious corruption because of the increased contact with other nations. There was a lot of pagan worship. And the people of Israel had really grown complacent in God's protection, and they didn't realize that their relationship with God had changed, that they had strayed. Um, so Amos, we know that he was originally a shepherd and before his activity as a prophet. He didn't really interact with other prophets, but he was very, very intelligent. He was very well informed about other nations. And his message was um, pretty straightforward. He preached punishment, which seemed particularly preposterous because it was such a prosperous time. There was a lot of good stuff going on for the Israelites economically, so it seemed absurd that there would be this coming catastrophe. But the reasons for that included the social injustices and the false worship of idols. So Amos wanted to bring them back into awareness that God is the one true God who controls heaven and earth. So with that, let us turn to the text, which this is Amos chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. This is the eighth of 8 oracles that Amos gives. The first 6 prophecies that appear in this sequence are about other nations. And then the 7th is about Judah, which is the southern part of Israel, but it's also about the northern part. And then this 8th one is about Israel in particular. Um, so that's important because it places them at the end of all the nations, um, which makes their crimes worse than the crimes of the other nations, because Israel is the one chosen by God, so that makes it even worse that they've strayed from God. They're more distant than God than even these other nations that don't know God at all. So with that, let's turn to the text, and I don't think there's going to be any good place for my little video screen here. So in this first section, which is verses 6 through 8, God denounces the sins of Israel. So what we're going to encounter here after this word because is we're going to encounter a list of the sins of Israel. And it starts with for 3 transgressions of Israel and for 4. One important thing to notice, there's a lot of numeric symbolism in Hebrew. So 3 plus 4 is 7, which is the number for fullness. So the fullness of transgression resides in Israel. So they've messed up pretty badly. And these are the ways that they've messed up. The first sin, they sell the righteous for silver. Another translation of this is innocent, I believe. Yes, they sell the innocent for money. This is referring to a juridical concept, that the judges are not respecting the rights of the innocent, and they're getting money for it. This verb to sell also indicates that they're, in addition to buying something for money, it also indicates that they're abandoning the care of something. So they have this responsibility to take care of the innocent, and they're abandoning that responsibility because it's too expensive. The second sin, they sell the needy for a pair of shoes. So a lot of these sins have in common is that they're regarding a neglected group of people. Here it's the righteous or the innocent, and here it's the needy. And what's going on in this one is that they've been instructed. This has to do with loans. So they've been instructed not to take advantage of people over loans. So what's happening is that the needy, those who need help from others to survive, are getting a loan to buy a pair of shoes. So this small amount of money that they're unable to pay back, and they're being sold into slavery over this small loan. And then we have trample the head of the poor into the dust of the earth. Poor has also been translated as miserable. This is these people are the lowest of the low in society. They're insignificant politically, economically, and they're being mistreated. And notice how they're being mistreated: trampled into the dust of the earth. Dust of the earth is commonly connected with curses. Think of, shaking off the dust from the town that doesn't welcome you. But also think of what God does. God raises up the lowly from the dust. So if you're not raising the lowly up from the dust, if you're doing the opposite of that, then obviously you're not in a good relationship with God. You're not aware of God as the Israelites are called to be. They're doing something wrong. And then the next sin that's being denounced is they turn aside the way of the afflicted. Afflicted is another category of people who are oppressed. And then there's two different ways to understand this word. It could refer to a legal process. So again, that juridical corruption where they're not getting a fair legal process, or it could refer to the way of life. That is, that they've created these structures that aren't helping the afflicted, that they live their life out, they live out their culture in such a way that the afflicted don't have a fair chance. They're not living the same life as everyone else. The next crime: a man and his father go into the same maiden. This refers to sexual abuse. And notice that this is another class of people, maidens, women, that aren't being treated fairly within their society. And then notice what this next part is: the result of all these sins, so that my holy name is profaned. And it's not just in connection with this last one right here, but it's the result of all of these sins. And it can either be an unintended result, or it could be the intended result, that the people are doing these things in order for the express purpose of doing that. That's obviously much, much worse than doing these things unknowingly, that this is also happening. But it's also including God's holy name as another category of abused person, just the same as the righteous, the needy, the poor, the afflicted, and the maidens. So the Israelites are doing some pretty terrible things. And it doesn't just stop there, but it goes on in verse 8. They lay themselves down beside every altar upon garments taken in pledge. Now he's turning to the religious environment. They lay themselves down upon every altar. So the priests are committing all these same crimes as the rest of the people, and yet they're still going into the altar. And this garments taken in pledge, that's a reference to kind of similar to the loan idea of not taking advantage of people in loans. If you took someone's livelihood or something that they needed to support themselves, you were supposed to give it back to them. You weren't supposed to keep it forever, but you were supposed to return it to them so that they could support themselves. So these garments that they've taken in pledge, they've taken them from the poor. They're the only thing that they have to keep them warm at night, and yet the priests are keeping it for themselves instead of returning it to the poor who need it to stay warm. And in the house of their God, this is an interesting one, because even though the most Bibles probably have this capitalized, it might serve the meaning a little bit better if it was lowercase. God is saying their God, whatever they're worshiping there, it's not me. So this isn't me. This isn't me that's asking for these things. But it's them. And I'm going to pause the video there, and we'll continue with this chapter in the